King in Black Issue 1 finds Eddie Brock contacting Captain America, telling the hero that it's time as he jumps from the building he's on, transforming into Venom as the Avengers all hands on deck call goes out. Eddie hopes that their plans will hold up as the city's evacuation begins, but he knows that it's not Null's impending arrival that's making his nerves rise. He's scared of waking his son into this nightmare. Eddie goes to see his sleeping son, knowing Dylan has been through too much and deserves so much better than all of this. He wishes he could let his son just sleep and never have to face any of the horrors that he has brought into this world. However, Eddie wakes his son, telling him that it's time, and the boy can feel that Null is close. At Avengers Mountain, Captain America directs the team to get a move on with the evacuation ships. He asks Tony how they are going, learning it's hard to pinpoint Null and his army, seeing as they don't give off any heat signatures, but either way, he knows that they will trip over their landmines, which Tony has made out of the leftover Kree-Skrull ships from the Kotati War. Tony asks about the big man and if he's radioed in yet, but Cap knows he hasn't, as Carol points out Null's army has arrived. The army flies into the minefield and Tony orders them to fire, blowing up all of the ships and taking out a huge chunk of the army. Eddie and Venom meanwhile feel the deaths of the symbiotes, knowing while about 100 were killed, it didn't slow the army down one bit. Tony soon realizes this as well, as Cap calls for the Avengers to assemble and head into action as the King in Black arrives in New York City. Eddie and Dylan meanwhile race to the bunker that Peter Parker gave them, as Dylan says he doesn't want to be left in a dark bunker on his own. Eddie knows this isn't up for discussion, having made the boy a promise to protect him no matter what. Eddie says that the boy shouldn't have had this life forced on him, and this is his fight and his mistakes, and the boy doesn't deserve these things being passed down to him. Eddie says he's going to end this, pleading with the boy to stay in the bunker. Dylan hopes that his father will come back as Eddie heads out, telling his son he loves him. The huge blast door closes as Steve contacts Eddie, telling him it's time for Plan B. Eddie knows that Plan B means everything's gone to shit, and it means that Null and his dragons have made landfall. On the ground in the city, Captain America leads the first wave of heroes to evac the people left over, using the heroes who have access to electricity and magic-based powers to combat the symbiotes. Cap hopes that Tony has heard from Thor, since they could really use his help with the dragons, who are exploding all over the city and covering everything in symbiotes. Iron Man says that he hasn't heard from Thor, but their other big gun is now in orbit. Professor Xavier contacts Steve, telling them that the backup is coming as the X-Men launch the second wave attack, deploying flying heroes like Storm to combat the dragons. Xavier knows a god of thunder would be helpful, but since he's not there, he offers up his own goddess of thunder. Venom meanwhile gets ready for the worst wave, the third one, as he heads to the spire left over from Carnage's assault on New York, hoping with any luck it will allow him and Eddie to safely connect to the hive without being consumed by it. Reaching the spire, Venom hopes Storm and the others break the dragons out of the hive with lightning and magic, since then he could control them himself from the spire. Connecting to the chair, Eddie hears that Doctor Strange is calling for help, telling him to hold on as Storm is also overwhelmed. Eddie continues to try and gain control of the dragons, but something goes wrong, knowing it's not just dragons that Null has brought, as the symbiote-possessed Celestials descend on the city. Null himself emerges from one of the beings, knowing his reputation precedes him, so he won't waste any time, telling the gathered heroes that he will kill their world, but first, he requires Eddie Brock. Captain America calls for a retreat as Null confronts the heroes on the ground, wondering who all the colourful costumed people are. Iron Man says that their big gun is there, as Cap says that normally they are the last thing guys like Null ever see, but today they are just going to watch as the Sentry is given permission to let loose. The hero speeds down to Earth, killing one of the Celestials as Bob grabs Null, taking him high into the sky as he introduces himself to Null. Null knows who the being is thanks to their hive's shared memory, knowing he once killed Carnage, so he wants to introduce himself to the hero. Grabbing Sentry, Null rips the man in half, freeing the Void, but Null isn't worried though, seeing as that he's the god of symbiotes, and the darkness inside Bob bows to him as he is the Void. Iron Man calls for Cap and the others to retreat, but Cap tries to assemble the Avengers for one last stand. Null isn't too impressed with the hero's last stand, using his powers over the symbiotes covering the city to swallow up the heroes, with only Spider-Man managing to escape to get help. Null Null turns his attention to the sky, using the symbiotes to block out the sun and plunge the entire world into darkness. Storm demands to know what just happened, learning from Iron Man that Null has somehow covered the Earth in a symbiotic dome. Null spots Storm destroying his army with her powers, so he conjures up a giant symbiote hand, grabbing the mutant and trapping her inside it, silencing her lightning powers for good. Iron Man hopes that Eddie has some good news, and the man doesn't, knowing that they will need to give Null what he wants. Eddie disconnects from the Spire, saying that he might be able to buy the hero some time, cutting communication with Tony as he asks Venom if he's ready. Venom is, wanting to reach directly out to Null, knowing that it will hurt immensely, but it must be done. Eddie reconnects to the Spire, reaching out and connecting to Null, who turns his giant symbiote claw on the hero immediately, grabbing him and telling Venom to come and join him. Venom is taken high above the city, where Null tells him to look at how beautiful the dark is, despite the light still being present. Venom pleads with God to just take him and leave Null, as Eddie is stripped of the symbiote. Null suddenly recognizes the man, thinking he had already killed Eddie at one point. Null knows it's his fault, since he really should have specified which Brock he wanted, since he doesn't want Eddie, he wants Dylan. Eddie refuses to give up his son, wanting to take his place, but Null rips Venom from Eddie's body, taking it into his own, saying that first he will take back his own child, and then he will take Eddie's, and since he will do that, he doesn't have much use for Eddie Brock now, causing Null to throw the naked Eddie from the building and into the symbiote-covered void below. King in Black issue 1 was one hell of a grim beginning to Donny Cates' massive, years-in-the-making symbiote-centric storyline. I thoroughly enjoyed that we just hit the ground running and get right into the action of it all, with Null finally arriving on Earth and just plowing through all of our heroes' defenses and plans like they were nothing. There really were some fantastic surprises this issue, with Sentry making a reappearance, only to almost die immediately, which I kind of felt had to happen just to sell Null as a huge threat, and the huge threat that he is to readers who might not have been following the event like I have, or have the knowledge of what Null is and what the King in Black storyline is. So it's a great way to sell him to sort of general audience readers as like a huge threat, that he just murdered this guy who is basically the Marvel equivalent to Superman. Eddie also kinda not realizing Null was calling for Dylan and not him was a little silly, considering we know how important the boy is regarding this whole storyline, so I'm not really sure why he thought Null was calling for him and not his son. I know he said he wanted a Brock, but I'm not sure why Eddie thought he meant him and not Dylan, since Dylan is obviously the one he has come for. Nevertheless, this was a great beginning to Donny Cates' big new storyline, and I'm really looking forward to seeing it all continue through the tie-ins and the remaining 4 issues of this main book. I'm going to give this issue a 9 out of 10.